Raise your hand if you've just met somebody new who could be useful for your business. Okay, so we've got about half the room. That's good. For the other half of you who didn't meet somebody who could be useful for your business, why? Did you only speak to one person? This is networking, and it's great. And I love the buzz, the energy in this room. I really love the energy. And it means that you guys are doing some really good business. Now, before the meeting started, I did a few interviews with a few people, and the one thing everybody said, common with everybody, was, I'm coming here because it's the place where the most people are and where I can network and meet people who can help my business. So raise your hand if you think you've had your business helped just by meeting a couple of people here. Yeah, that's what I like to see. Lots of hands up. Brilliant. Now, we've got a guest speaker tonight. The guest speaker is actually my business partner. Now, we keep having a bit of a debate over who's the older. So at the end of this talk, I'd like... No, you don't want me to do that?
Go on, do whatever you like.
Oh,
it's okay.
I was just going to work out which one of the two of us is the older. You know, I mean, it's just friendly banter, isn't it? Friendly?
A gentleman never tells.
Very good answer. Very good answer. I like that. Now, he's been in property since 2001. Before property, he actually had, what do they call it? J-O-B. Job. That was it. That was it. You had a job. He used to work for a small company. They were sort of in every country in the world, called Accenture, a management consultancy. Anybody heard of them? Yeah? Yeah, it was not much of a job, really. But I just worked at banks, law, accounting. He worked telling us what to do in the bank. Yeah, I'll take that one. But no, he's a real property entrepreneur. And in 2006, he did his first commercial conversion. Old school. I mean, that's why I say work out who's the older. He does it old school. He got planning permission for that. That was before permitted development was even introduced in 2013. So that was 7 years before it became easy. But he's got quite a pedigree. I mean, he likes to sort of think of himself as a property guy. But personally, I don't think of him as property. I think of him more as a, I don't know.
TV celebrity?
Yeah, YouTuber, I think's the word I'm looking for. Now, I asked earlier who's subscribed to his YouTube channel, and virtually everybody's hand went up. I think there was only probably 10 in the room. Now, he's been doing YouTube probably 4 years, I think, but he's got this little certificate here for 50,000 subscribers. Now, 50,000 people can't be wrong who are subscribed and watching this channel every single day. And when I know we launch videos, I wake up in the next morning and I look at the video and I go, 2,000 people have watched that in 12 hours. How? 50,000 subscribers. There's a lot of knowledge in there. Everything you will ever need in property. It's the no bullshit channel. And forgive you can edit that bit out. Bleep me. But I think this deserves a wonderful round of applause. And I don't just want a round of applause. I want everybody to stand to their feet and give a massive round of applause. Come on. Give it to Mr. Ranjan Bhattacharya. Come on, everybody. Mr. Ranjan Bhattacharya.
Thank you. The 50,000 mark. Thank you very much. Well done. Thank you.
And now, I hope I haven't bigged him up too much, because he's going to inspire you, because we're going through uncertain economic times. And we sort of said, how can we inspire the audience? Well, the message I keep hearing, and we keep hearing, is how to thrive and survive in these difficult and challenging times. We've been hearing it for the last couple of years. So we're going to have a really groundbreaking talk. Never, ever been done. Not gone on YouTube or anything. And I don't know, might we film this and put this on YouTube tonight if they're kind and nice?
I don't think we'll get it. I don't think we'll edit out the swear words by the end of tonight.
I promise I won't swear anymore. Well, I shall leave the stage to you. Big round of applause to Mr. Ranjan Bhattacharya.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, ladies and gentlemen. Ladies and gentlemen, what we're going to talk about now is how to survive and thrive the economic crisis of 2023. Does anyone think there is going to be a crisis in 2023? No one? No. Okay. Oh, I like the positivity. No, there is going to be an economic crisis in 2023. I'm going to set out the scene for that. But I'm going to explain why actually property people are well positioned if they adopt the right strategies to actually see this through and come out the other end and prosper. That's really the scene that I'm setting. Because we've been through a few crises in my time in property. I'm going to kind of explain how we kind of dealt with some of those in the past. And what I always find is that the people that put in the groundwork in preparing for they see the crisis coming over the hill, they prepare and plan for it. They not only see it off, but they actually prosper and thrive their way through it. So what is the crisis I'm talking about? The big problem is the money printing that's gone on, and how this is going to impact all of us and how this is going to impact us as property people. They've created out of thin air £500 billion since COVID. Now, in the car on the way here, I was listening to talk radio, and they had the presenter on there, and they did something which I find quite common. They misdescribed what had happened. They actually said, they talked about government borrowing being too high. What does government borrowing actually mean? When the government borrowed this 500 billion that they've done since COVID, who's the lender? The lender is the Bank of England. The government says, hey, we want 500 million. Rishi Sunak wants to do eat out to help you get cheap burger and chips. But the lender is the Bank of England. The Bank of England don't have any money. What they do is turn on the printing presses. And the horrifying figure is that 99.5% of the government debt that has been created since COVID has been bought by the Bank of England, which has simply printed money into existence out of thin air to supply government money to spend. So that means there are more physical pounds in circulation than any before. And that has to have an effect on the value of that pound in your pocket. And that has quite catastrophic effects for everyone around unless they do something to hedge against this serious issue. So during lockdown, we didn't really see the impact of what's happened. We didn't see it because when you're locked down, how can you spend? So although the government printed a load of money, the velocity of this movement of cash around the economy just wasn't there. Now everyone's out and about. It is really coming home to roost, and we are seeing higher inflation rates than we have seen since the 1970s. The other thing that's kind of masked this is that all the G7 countries have kind of done this together. So when they all do it together, you're kind of inflating your currencies and the relative values to each other together. When Venezuela did it on its own, it's a weaker currency, they're doing it in isolation. When Zimbabwe did it on its own, it's a weaker currency, they did it in isolation. And that's why it really went belly up for those guys. In the US of A, it's even worse. You know, it's really, really horrific when you find out that 80% of all the US dollars ever printed were printed since January 2020. They have done massive amount. And you see, what has actually held up the dollar is that everyone uses it for international trading. You buy oil in dollars and all of this. You know, but now people are saying around the world, I mean, $100 bills. Do you know 75% of all $100 bills actually reside in foreign banks outside the US? They're held in foreign currency for people to trade, mainly oil and commodities and stuff like that. So people, the dollar is not linked to anything. It's just paper. So around the world, people are losing faith in some of these paper currencies. Already there's resistance that Saudi Arabia are looking at selling oil for the first time in Chinese yuan. That is something that's actually happening because people are worried about what's going on. So what does that mean? Well, inflation. Inflation over the last 20 years ain't been that bad. If you look at a basket of goods, and that's what they tend to measure it by, it's a basket of goods, how much have things gone up? So in the last 20 years, we've had about 69%. And the thing is, inflation is really dependent on what your basket of goods is. If you hate avocados, then you don't really care that they've gone up 38%. So it's down to you as an individual, and this basket is kind of on average. The other thing that happens with this basket is it's fiddled. And that is why we feel that the headline rate of inflation that we read about doesn't seem to be true. Headline inflation is 5.1%. They reckon it's going to be 7% by the end of the year. Who feels that prices are going up just by 5%? It's more than that, isn't it? And that's because of the way this is calculated. And this is an idea of how the inflation rate is fiddled. There's also what we call shrinkflation. Toblerone. Toblerone used to look like the diagram below. What they've done is they've kept the price the same, the package size is the same, but they've increased the spacing between the triangles. So they give you less chocolate for the same money. But in effect, the price has gone up. And they've done other things with this basket of goods. 20 years ago, for example, they used to talk about a loaf of bread, and it was brown bread. Now they've swapped it to white bread a few years ago, because that's slightly cheaper. And then how many slices make up a loaf? The number of slices in a loaf for the inflation figures is fewer than it was 20 years ago. So there's all sorts of massaging going on of the figures. So what do you think real inflation actually is? Anyone want to have a guess? I'm hearing a lot of figures, but I'm hearing a lot of double figures. I think it's around, I just feel it's around 12%-ish. And the thing is with inflation, and we haven't seen this since the 1970s. We haven't seen this since the 1970s. So people are very unused to dealing with a high inflation environment. So what we have had is this 68% of inflation in the last 20 years. If we're going to see around 12% inflation for the next few years, it only takes 5 years to rack up as much inflation as we've had in the last 20. That is the thing that we've got to kind of take into account that's actually happening right now. Because there's no solution to inflation. The real solution to, I actually watched, because we had all this in the 1970s. And while I was researching some of this, I saw a YouTube video of an interview with Ronald Reagan when he was going for an election I think he won in 1980 or something like that. And he was talking about the same problems. You know, the only way out of inflation cycle is to stop borrowing, is to reduce that borrowed money that's been printed and take it out of circulation so that the money is worth something. And there's no indication of that sort of thing happening. So inflation, the real issue right now is that over the next 5 years, we're likely to get the same inflation that we have had in the last 20. And what that means is that currency, if you've got money in the bank, currency is a little bit of an unreliable store of value. If you've got money in the bank, it is basically losing money each year that you have it. If you're reliant on a single source of income through a job, then it is unlikely that that will keep pace, earnings will keep pace with the real rate of inflation. It may keep pace with the headline rate of inflation, but will it keep pace with the headline rate of inflation? So what we've got to do is, I mean, there's a lot of talk about financial freedom. You know, people talk about let's achieve financial freedom through property. The first thing you've got to do over the now is to come up with a strategy just to stand still, to preserve your earning capacity, the value of the money that you generate from the inflation that's going to hit us at least for the next 3, 4, probably 5 years. Inflation is like a bear. It chases you. And the people that aren't planning for it and doing something about it will be the ones that the bear will catch up with. So you've got to do a little bit to outrun the bear. You've got to do a little bit more to put some clear distance between you and that inflation bear. So before thinking about financial freedom or anything like that, the first thing that property investors have got to do is come up with a strategy just to stand still, to preserve their income levels how they are right now. The great thing is that property is one of the best ways to hedge, and not just hedge, but outpace the effects of inflation and actually get ahead of the curve, to get ahead of the curve and build long-term wealth. Traditionally, gold has been quite interesting. It's been a hedge against inflation since pretty much the ancient Greeks. It's very fascinating that an ounce of gold in Greek times and in Roman times basically bought a fine tailored gentleman's suit. And pretty much throughout history, Tudor England, even to the present day, the value of an ounce of gold is what it costs to buy a fine tailored suit. So that has been a long-standing way to preserve value against rising inflation. The problem, of course, and you can do things like crypto. We've all seen how that's turned out in the last few months. It's very much up and down and very unpredictable. But the surefire way of doing it, the best way to do it, because obviously gold doesn't produce any income, and you can't buy it in a leveraged way. The way to hedge and get ahead is to focus on income-producing assets, which are bought in a highly leveraged way, with the minimum of cash left in the deal at the end. Now, if all your strategies are focused on that, you will hedge against this inflation curve. I just want to share with you a little bit of my own history, if you like. I graduated from university in 1990. My first job was a graduate at Accenture. My starting salary was $16,500. With that graduate starting salary, I was able to buy this little property here in Islington, the whole property. Today, 2022, I looked this up on the internet, a graduate joining Accenture starting salary is 30 grand. This building in Islington is now converted into 4 flats. The smallest flat is the 1-bedroom flat on the middle floor, which is worth 400 grand. So the person joining the same company as I did all those years ago, on the same graduate scheme, cannot afford to get on the ladder in the way I did. So what that shows is that whatever happens with inflation, buying assets, income-producing assets, which are leveraged and produce positive cash flow enough to service all the debt, is the only strategy, is the only real thing you can do to hedge yourself and get ahead of the inflation that we are about to hit. So the only strategy is the time-honored strategy is income-producing assets. Now, I've done a video on this on YouTube, and tomorrow you'll get an email with some links to some various videos that support some of the content that we've done. But when I talk about buying leveraged assets with little money left in, which are income producing, I'm talking about the BRRRR strategy. The BRRRR strategy is well known: buy, refurbish, refinance, rent out, repeat. But the way you implement it at different phases of the property market cycle is slightly different. The nuances of of what you do as each component part, depending on the market, is different. So now it's a slightly different ballgame. What I don't think it's the right time for are strategies where you don't own anything. I don't think this is the right time to mess around with rent-to-rent, deal sourcing, deal packaging, and that kind of stuff. Now is the time to acquire assets, income-producing assets, leveraged, which produce positive cash flow. If you do, I mean, when we talk about lease options and the like, that's not a rent-to-rent strategy. That is a strategy when you have the right to own the property at some point in the future. Those are good. The reason for this is because the people that own assets, even if they're leveraged, what happens in times of inflation is the level of the debt actually freezes. The debt stays the same, but the value of that debt in 5 years' time with 12% inflation will be a lot less than it is at the time you take it out. And that's the real power. But the income you generate from those assets tend to rise with inflation. And that's how you basically beat and outrun the trend that we are about to face. I'm going to cover this. I've got this on a YouTube, but I want to talk about previous challenges. Now, what I've found is that there are times when everything kind of aligns in property to give you real opportunities. And the best times that I've had in property are actually at the times when I've figured out what's going on and come up with some strategies to deal with it, head it off at the pass, and actually get ahead. In the 1990s, we had doubling interest rates. We actually had property prices that were falling. And the way to hedge, when property prices were falling back then, I was buying houses every 4 or 5 months, and each time I was buying a house, the market value was slightly less than the one that I bought before. The way to hedge yourself in that sort of market is to always buy below market value from motivated sellers. So whatever the value is today, you're buying 25, 30% from motivated sellers. And you're making sure that the only reason for owning them is the positive cash flow that it produces. And that was a strategy for doing well in the 1990s, and that actually worked very well. In the credit crunch, the real challenge there was getting debt to do projects. Prices fell a little bit, and they fell a little bit because people couldn't get debt. The affordability wasn't there. People couldn't get loans. So if people couldn't get loans, prices fell a little bit because demand was a little bit less. So the opportunity there, or the way we tackled that crisis, if you like, was to use private investors. Private investors JV. We partnered with people, we did deals, we bought unmortgageable properties using private investor capital, made them mortgageable, made them fundable, and then refinanced them in better times. What I've found is that the deals that are done during these crisis times are the best ones. Yeah, properties, when you do things in a boom and you just ride a boom, you don't do that well, quite frankly. You do well at times of trouble, when you figured out what's going on, you head it off at the pass, and you set the foundations to do something great. In 2015, we had the advent of Section 24, the tax on your mortgage payments. That was a massive crisis. That was a massive crisis because prior to that point, most people owned properties in their own names. They didn't own them in limited company structures. Now that's changed. When we started Baker Street back in 2016, the theme for many of the meets that we did was to help people navigate their way through this Section 24 crisis and find a way to incorporate their portfolios into limited companies or start their property businesses afresh within limited company frameworks. And during those periods, we ran a whole set of emergency workshops for people, and I think more than 1,500 people attended. And we've helped hundreds of people actually incorporate their property businesses and get out of that mess. What people did on the other side was great, because Section 24 was a real opportunity. It was an opportunity to set up your property business in a proper way, get proper corporate-type funding, and also deal with a lot of other issues that property investors would naturally face, such as capital gains tax, inheritance tax, and stuff like that. So it became a real enabler. So what I think is absolutely key for people is that you've got to do this, because inflation is just going to be a massive killer for people. And the people that always seem to do well in cycles of inflation are people with leveraged property assets. And you've got to emphasize the word leverage. There's no point buying them cash. Because when you borrow, when you leverage property, remember, as inflation goes up, the value of that debt remains frozen. So it gets better and better as the years go on. So to maintain your existing level of income, to achieve financial freedom and to get ahead, you've got to be focusing on these income-producing strategies. You've got to be doing BRRRR in the right way. And otherwise, basically, you're doomed. I mean, I say that in a sort of callous way, but I really feel in every period of inflation, the people who have not done property haven't fared too well. They've seen their standards of living fall and their buying power kind of decrease. One thing that Andrew and I are running, is a set of 3 one-day emergency conferences, which we are running to help people navigate the way through this crisis and to prepare a plan for dealing with the next 3 years. Whether people have got cash, whether people are looking to start a property business or looking to grow their property business, it's a slightly different take on what you need to do and how you need to prepare the ground to succeed over the next few years. We're going to put out more information on this later on. You'll get an email from this tomorrow. But if you want to know how to get a blueprint for the next few years to actually invest in property in a way that will hedge you and get you ahead of inflation, then scan the code and see us on one of those dates. Really, that's what I've got to say. We're going to take questions and answers in a moment. Are we just going straight into questions, yeah? Let's go into, straight into questions, yeah. Right. So you've heard a lot from us today. We wanted to kind of open up the batting with the Baker Street. We're very glad to be back after this hiatus. We're going to be here each and every month. And always what we've done with Baker Street is brought to the room speakers and topics which are of particular interest to that moment. There are always challenges in property, and you've always got to up your game. You've always got to adapt your game. And what we're going to be focusing on over the next remainder of the year are the strategies that you need to be adopting right now. Not that may have worked 5 years ago or worked for someone 10 years ago. The stuff that you need to do right now if you want to get ahead in this game.
Well, I think it's really important because what we're doing, we don't just talk about it, we actually do it. And what we want to do is keep you sharp, keep you fresh, share with you the challenges that we have and bring that content to you. Now, we've got Richard. Have you got the microphone, Richard? Oh, we've actually got a lady with a question here. So we're going to take questions from the floor. If you've got a question, please raise your hand so that Richard can see where to come with the microphone. And who do we have here? Sorry.
My name is Anna, and I'm doing property for several years and quite interested in 2023, what is awaiting us around the corner. And my question is the following. So Ranjan was talking about the income-producing assets and with the high leverage. So in the coming years, so it's likely that potentially the interest rate will be going up and maybe even also with a high speed. And the rents usually are not catching up that quickly. So the income-producing assets might not necessarily cover for the interest rates growing. So how would you advise us to hedge against that?
Very good question.
Good question.
5-year fixed rates. Fix the no, seriously, fix the deal right off the bat. If it works on day one, it'll continue to get better.
Mm-hmm. And I would also say stress test your business so that you're not taking out. If you think interest rates might go up from the current level to 5%, stress test what you're about to borrow at 5%, work out what you need as a rent, and if it's going to make you into loss, don't go that far with your loan to value. Pull your loan to value down a little bit.
Hi there, my name's Tudor. This is a bit of a niche question, but since you touched upon an exit of a multi-unit block, and we're talking about how running the bear, etc., would you recommend when you exit a multi-unit block to get a blanket mortgage per se, or try to get a leasehold mortgage per unit and kind of be stubborn about it and try and do it that way, split the titles, or would you be content with getting a blanket mortgage?
So I think from what I'm understanding of your question, what you're saying is, would we sell the whole building as one block, or would we break it up?
Remortgage.
Oh, remortgage.
Your title split, or redo it as a whole.
Right, okay, good question. Well, in terms of that particular site, we're exiting via a sale, so that's slightly different. But in terms of your question, would we remortgage or title split? I would take a look based on what products are in the market at the time. One model doesn't fit every economic cycle. Title splitting will cost you money, it will cost you time, it will cost you admin. You've got to have different setups, a different freeholder to the leaseholders. Therefore, there might be a benefit to doing it, but you need to cost it, is what I would say. I wouldn't automatically go, oh, do it straight off the bat.
I think most of the time, keep it on a commercial loan.
Yeah.
The minute you get over 4 flats, it's really problematic, because lender A doesn't want to be in bed with lender B if they've got exposure to the, you know, and all, you get all those sort of issues. And the other thing, it just keeps it simple. And the other thing that people miss is when you get over a certain debt size, you're open to different lenders. There's certain lenders that will give you commercial loans, but they'll only deal with a minimum of 500k loan. There are other lenders that will kick in at $1 million. There are other lenders that will kick in at 2 million. And they're cheaper rates because you're buying in a little bit of bulk. So it may not necessarily be that title splitting is possible on larger schemes, or certainly advisable from an admin or a cost point of view either.
Yeah. Thank you.
I've got to stand up. Oh, God, no,
Oh,
that
yeah, you
put a
might as
decent
well.
show
Oh, you
Come
are
on,
standing
Kevin.
up. Oh.
Hello, Kevin. You see me on Property Elevator later on this month with Ranjan.
Oh, yes. Whoa.
I won't say any more than that. Right, so I would have worn a better shirt if I knew I was going to stand up. So value for money, 3 questions. So first one is...
I've only got one.
Only one?
I've only got one.
God, only one, right. What's the most important one? Right,
we
so
need somebody
the
else, Richard,
criteria
who's forgot.
for borrowing is going to change quite soon for getting mortgages. That happened, just about 2007, 2008, and the whole market crashed after that because the banks just went nuts. Where are we in the 18-year cycle? When they open these floodgates, which they're talking about now is going to happen, what's going to happen to the market and how can we protect ourselves from that?
Cool. That's an in.
There's quite a lot in there.
I was going to say, you've got all 3 questions in. I saw that.
Now, okay, interest rates and mortgage affordability is an interesting thing. It actually is more important how it affects domestic borrowers than investors, because domestic borrowers for residential properties is more than 90% of the market. The interesting thing is that the Bank of England brought in some affordability criteria, as you pointed out, about stress testing. What they have done is something you could say is quite sneaky. They put out the Bank of England put out a consultation earlier this year, which they are looking at adopting. And they're going to change, they brought in these affordability stress testings in 2007, 2008 after the credit crunch. And it basically said that you had to, they will stress test a loan to an individual at higher than the pay rate. Now, because interest rates are rising a little bit, they did that mainly because the banks were in an uncertain position. Now they're saying the banks are more sure. So we don't have to stress test loans so much. And they're going to drop the idea of stress testing above the pay rate, which is very interesting as interest rates are rising. So you could argue, well, you could argue that there's something there to keep property prices up. So what is happening right now is, yes, interest rates have gone up a little bit, but they're still at the level they were pre-COVID. So they haven't gone up to higher than what they were pre-COVID. But the affordability criteria are changing, which means the stress test above the pay rate for domestic buyers is going to be lost, which means people, even though interest rates are rising a little bit, people will still be able to get the same mortgages, which should mean that property prices stay put, which they will do anyway because they're always underpinned by underlying inflation. Property prices have gone up about 10% this year. Headline inflation, we reckon, is about 7%. You know, so they're always underpinned by that anyway.
I mean, the thing I would sort of chip in to sort of come at this from a slightly different perspective, having worked in a bank. What I observed was the bank itself was a bit like an oil tanker. Doesn't turn direction very easily, takes a lot of momentum. But then when it does turn, it'll go, right, we're going to write first-time buyer mortgages. And all of a sudden, the ship heaves to one direction. What the government tried to do with their policies back in 2007-8 was all the banks were sort of going left and right, rocking away, and they've tried to stabilise it. They can now see they've got the reserves, and they now want to let the free market sort of drive again. So the banks, we will see the cycles we've seen before, and the banks will give more money out and relax their criteria. Therefore, property prices will continue on that basis. So a slightly different way of looking at it, but in agreement.
Good question. Oh, Yogesh.
Yogesh.
Hi.
Property elevator.
I've been in property elevator a couple of times. Hi, I'm Dr. Yogesh Patel. Hi. My question is buy-to-let still dead? Is there any point doing buy-to-let anymore, given what you said tonight? Or should people do buy-to-let anymore, or just it's a waste of time?
Buy-to-let is certainly not dead if done in a proper way. I mean, I think the buy-to-let of the accidental landlord is dead. The buy-to-let of the person that takes it as a business and has multiple rentable units under one rooftop is where it's at.
Mm-hmm. I think, from my perspective, buy-to-let, we've talked about the commercial unit. Now that could be bought by somebody who buys 8 units and has density, so it's easier to maintain, easier to tenant, manage, and that sort of thing. Becoming more professional in your game is what it's about. A lot of landlords have incorporated. It's caused them to think a bit more business-like than they were previously. And I know so many landlords who, having gone through the incorporation process, their mindset has changed about what they're doing. So I think that's spot on for me.
Hi guys, thank you very much. It's been very insightful. My question is, given what you were talking about next year and sort of getting ready for it, how do you see the expected yield to change from the current state of play, and whether it's going to given the there is a potential recession, it might affect the property prices but also the yield. Where do you see that sort of thing moving, and what do we want to be prepared for in terms of the yield?
I think yield is a very interesting question. I think I don't look at yields in the way that a lot of people look at yields. So a lot of people look at yields saying, here's a fully ready property, what's it worth, and what's the rent? Divide the rent over that full valued property, and what do you get? What I look at is taking a property that needs, that we can add value to. And I look at, what am I buying it for? What money am I putting into it? And what is my total cost? And then I'm looking at the rental income divided by those costs, not the value. Because I will have uplifted the value and made about 30-40% equity in there. But I have only put out a certain amount of cost into that deal. So I look at my yield over costs. And for those, you're looking at about 8 to 10% quite easily.
I think I'd come at this slightly differently to you. And as you know, I look at return on time and return on effort, not just yield. Because I can get a phenomenal 20% yield, but I have to put myself through the rinser, washing people's sheets, changing beds, being a service accommodation operator, and no offence to anybody in service accommodation, but I look at my return on time and return on effort for what I do. And if I'm spending my time working very hard all day to make that money, that's not a good use of my time. If I'm spending my time and effort to uplift, like the case study I shared with you, that is a good use of my time and effort, and therefore yield almost becomes secondary.
I think Andrew's right. Return on costs, yield on costs is very, very important. Return on time is super important. You'll see on Series 4 of Property Elevator, I remember one of the guys pitched a deal, very excited about 30% plus margin. But the project time was over 3 years, because it was a full planning type of project. So when you divide that return over a 3-year period, it's not that exciting. Whereas certain deals, like this Leicester one, this will be in and out in a year. So to get the same sort of margin over a year, then your return on time is completely different. Have you had any questions from the back?
I think Richard was
Just
going
one
over.
quick question. Ranjan, you mentioned about current strategies about getting income-producing properties with no cash left. So my question here is, so that implies buying below market value. So my question is, what do you think the scope of opportunities for buying below market value in current market situation? I mean, given the market is on the up. So where do we find the deals, and what do you see the directions we should be?
Below market value can be tackled in a number of ways. With residential property, it's pretty much from motivated sellers. Because a 3-bedroom terrace, everyone watches Homes Under the Hammer, you know what you can do with a 3-bedroom terrace. So there's no knowledge deficit that you're kind of spotting. Everyone knows everything that you can do with a 3-bedroom end of terrace. So there, with residential, you're pretty much looking at motivated sellers. With defunct commercial, you don't have to bother with below market value. You can spot things at market value, because what you're looking for is ways of adding value to it that other people haven't spotted. So you're looking at picking up stuff at market value, but using your knowledge of what you can do to it, add 30-40% value to it. And that's usually by converting some of it into residential or converting it to another use. We've got we just signed a lease on an office building. And it's been hard letting out this office building over the COVID period. But now, the government have introduced something called Usage Class E, which allows offices to be repurposed to practically anything. You can turn an office into a restaurant, a gym, a dentist surgery, or anything you like. So we didn't have any takers that were interested in this office space as an office. But we had one taker as a private gym, and one set of people who we've signed the lease with are doing a private GP practice. Now, previously, you'd have to go for full planning permission. If I wanted to take a ground floor office building and rent it out as a GP surgery, I'd have to go for planning permission. And the planners would probably say, no, no, no. But the government have enabled us to repurpose these buildings to alternative uses. We've picked up a bank building today, and that can be repurposed to multiple different types of uses. Obviously, we haven't got a bank going in there. No bank wants to open up in there. But banks are usually in positions of good pitches on the high street. They have, they're close to other multiple names. They have good footfall. And other types of businesses tend to want to locate there. The most interest we're getting for that unit is actually from restaurant operators. Maybe it's eating out to help out that kick-started all of that, but there's a massive interest among restaurant operators for that. So it's all about repurposing. It's all about repurposing to add that value. And with commercial, when you get a vacant unit and you put a tenant in it, you've added a huge amount of value just by doing that.
Mm-hmm. We've got time for one final question, unfortunately, tonight, so we'll take that one from over the back.
Hi, I'm Nemi. I managed to convince 4 of my friends and my husband to attend today, so...
Oh, brilliant.
Well done.
Thank you. So you talk about permitted development rights for commercial, but what about residential? I hear that if you have a detached residential property, you can build 2 stories above it.
Yes.
Correct. And, commercial conversions, how do you control the cost? Because I think it all sounds wonderful, but how do you control the building costs? Because I'm finding that that's one bit that it's a little bit of an unknown. And finally, how do you raise investors? I'm looking for who wants to invest £10,000 in my project. Thank you.
Sounds like she's asking one question for each person she's brought along. But I've forgotten the first one.
Well, it was, can you go upwards through permitted development? Yes, through Schedule 2, Part AA of the GDPO is the rules for the upward extension.
I love the way he quotes this stuff. Brilliant.
Would you like the page number?
Yes.
So that's your upward extension covered quickly. Yes, you can. However, I did release a video with a planning consultant which actually covered how the 3 particular London councils brought this into challenge, and as a result, it's now not quite as straightforward as the legislation is written. So tread with caution, don't just assume, is the first thing. I've forgotten the second part of the question.
Costs. Let me just add a little bit to that one. In my view, it is far more, you can generate more profit the more units you create. So there's no residential PD that allows you to split or subdivide a residential unit into multiple residential units. With commercial properties, you can actually create multiple residential units, and the more residential units you create, typically the more profitable the deal is. You don't tend to make as much by making an existing house bigger, unless it's in the luxury end, or unless you're extending it to do an HMO, a sort of under 6 unit HMO, which wouldn't need planning in a lot of areas. But generally speaking, the profits from PD tend to be from subdivision.
And controlling your costs, that's down to how you put together your building schedule and tender for the work with the contractors. If you do it correctly, you'll come in or around cost, provided you do not deviate from the schedules that you create. That's schedule of finishes, detail, where plug sockets, lights, everything's going to go, all drawn out on a schematic so that the builders can all quote. It's useful to get a QS in just to compare an apple with an apple. I mean, we've been interviewing for a QS, and even getting 2 QSs to quote for the same thing, it was like an apple and a giraffe. It was that far out, and I'm having to rebalance these to get them to the same thing. So it's very important that you compare apples and apples and drill down into the detail and make sure everything is included. So,
but I think with costs, as I've always banged on about, really, it was one of the reasons I love PD, particularly in inflationary periods, because if I'm building 5 houses in a field somewhere, I'll get the planning in a year, maybe, if I'm lucky, and I'll be looking at buying washing machines and all of that, maybe 2 years down the line. What price are they going to be? You know, at least when you're dealing with a permitted development, you get the permission in 56 days, the building is already built, and it's pretty much internal conversion. So the costs are far more predictable when you're in an inflationary period. Are we going to do one more? She's waved her hand so energetically. That's Baker Street energy. I think she deserves it.
Go for it. Go on, Richard. You've got
the
one
final
last one.
question of the day.
Final.
This is going to be a double act. Firstly, Ranjan, missed you. You won't remember me. Sonal and Jeff. About 15 years ago, we were there.
Where?
In Baker Street. Your original Baker Street.
Where did we hold that?
Back in Kensington with Vanish and all of that.
Yeah. Okay, yeah.
So
I
I
do
have
remember.
missed you
Yeah.
and want to say you've actually hit 3 topics that I've been chewing people's ears off about. Inflation, interest rates, and the changing climate. So on the ball as always. So my burning question, I'm going to have him do it. So hold on. Double act.
Okay. So hi, I'm Jeff. I remember
Yes,
you from a while back, yeah. So we were heavily into property back in those days, and then we have since been doing more work in financial markets. So we trade futures, equities, energy, that sorts of things, and we've implemented our own inflation hedging strategies. But we also are aware that, property, we've kind of let the ball drop on that one a little bit. So we still have a property portfolio, but we need to rebalance a little bit. So that's why we're here today, is to try to figure out the best ways of doing that. Totally back exactly what you're talking about here with regards to problems coming. We're seeing it in the markets already, and I'm trying to take a market barometer check on what everyone's finding. Like, 'cause this is everybody here is the people on the ground, right? And they're the ones that are finding the issues with financing or our deals stacking up and that sort of thing. Anyway, long story short, I'm just curious from an investment point of view, for you guys personally, I know you're property people. Are you 100% into property, or are you using other strategies to fight the inflation that's coming in any other form?
I can't think of anything else. Mainly because once you know something, if I try something else, I'll be starting from scratch, quite frankly. And once you know it, all the pieces seem to just slot together. And particularly, it's not really, the kind of deals that we're doing at the moment is pretty much you buy a property and you've pretty much added value relatively instantly. The Leicester deal that Andrew has talked about today, we have added value as of 6 p.m. today, simply by getting that permission to put 8 flats above that bank building has added significant value, much more than the annual rate of inflation since our time of ownership, which has been a few months. And the ability to do that with such surety is based on, I guess, knowledge and application of that knowledge, and it's also based on being able to do it with leverage. Because with a lot of other types of stuff, you might have the best Bitcoin strategy in the world, but it's difficult to do that with leverage.
I'd counter what you're saying, and I'm going to be contrarian here and really challenge you. With the Leicester building, we can control and influence pretty much every step of that way, every step of that journey.
Yes.
Can you control lumber prices? Can you control oil prices? Can you control how many US dollars the US are going to print to erode the value of what you've got?
That's a good point.
The problem that happened with COVID was all these dollars got printed, all these pounds got printed, and nobody actually realised there was massive inflation because the pound in your pocket was now worth a lot less without anybody doing anything. It was silent inflation by stealth. And if you're trading currencies and a government prints it, all of a sudden, that's worth less in real terms. You own a smaller proportion. So I'd be a contrarian to what you're saying and challenge it. And like Ranjan, I invest in property. Yeah, I have a pension, a SAS since 1996, but actually I stopped using it years ago because I worked out the numbers on it. I'd have to live to 106 just to get the money out of it from the annuity that I'll get paid on. And I thought, hang on, I back myself more than I back some fund manager who's going to charge me for his time, charge me for his fees, charge me trading, charge me everything. I'll back myself. I trust myself. Thank you. And on that note,
I agree with him.
Mate, well done. Thank you.